The year was 1889, and the wind moaned low through the scorched hills, curling like a wounded animal around the blackened bones of Hollow Creek Ranch. Ash fell like dry snow, soft and slow, muffling the silence with a kind of reverence, as if the land itself held its breath in mourning. Smoke rose from the barn's twisted frame, its ribs charred and broken, a beast gutted and left to rot under the indifferent sky. One bull stood tethered near the fence line, smoke curling from his singed coat, eyes wide with the dumb, enduring patience of something that had seen too much. Rowan Hart rode into that silence with dust on her boots and blood in her mouth. Not her own. A dry cut from a branch she hadn't noticed in the ride back. It didn't matter. Nothing did now, not the ache in her shoulders or the burning in her eyes. Her father's horse was gone. So were the rest of the cattle. The gates hung broken. The water trough overturned. But that wasn't what stopped her cold. It was the stillness. The way the place she'd known all her life no longer breathed. She dismounted, one boot crunching on blackened dirt. Her breath came slow and shallow. She called for him, once. Pa. But the sound died before it reached the porch. She found him near the kitchen garden. He'd crawled partway toward the house, as if he'd tried to make it to the hearth one last time. His hat was gone, his shirt soaked dark from where the bullet had taken him. Flies moved slow in the morning chill, not bold enough yet for the day's heat. She knelt beside him and didn't cry. Not right away. There was a strange stillness inside her, a blank place where her heart should have been. She touched his face, rough and unshaved. His eyes were closed. That was a kindness. One hand was curled into a fist, clutching a torn scrap of paper. Half a map, maybe. She took it without opening it. The burial was quiet. A shovel from the shed, dry earth that resisted every strike. She dug until her hands blistered and her back screamed. Then she laid him down beside the old sycamore where her mother had been buried when Rowan was 12. A stone for a marker, nothing carved, just the way Pa would have wanted. She stood for a long time, staring at the fresh earth, her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a scream. When she finally looked up, the land stretched wide and empty around her. Hollow Creek was gone. Just like that. She rode out before the sun finished climbing, taking only what she could carry. Her saddle, a rifle, and the last branded bull, coaxed into following with quiet words and steady hands. She didn't look back. There was nothing left worth seeing. The road to Briar Hollow was long, winding through gulches and dry riverbeds where shadows clung like secrets. The bull lagged behind, stubborn and slow. But she talked to him like he was an old friend. He was the only soul left who knew her father's name. Briar Hollow wasn't on any map that mattered, but folks knew it. It lay low between the hills, wrapped in a bend of the river that still flowed even in summer. The air there smelled of soil and sweetgrass. Rowan rode in at dusk, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky with the bruised colors of sleep. Pearl Walker stood in the doorway of her house, one hand on her hip, the other holding a lantern. She was thinner than Rowan remembered, her once dark hair now more silver than black, but the eyes hadn't changed. Sharp, gray, and searching. Rowan didn't dismount. She just sat there, covered in dust and death. "You're Elias's girl," Pearl said, after a long moment. Rowan nodded. "I heard," Pearl added softly. "I'm sorry." Rowan didn't answer. Her throat was a dry knot. Pearl stepped aside without asking anything more. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and old wood. Rowan dropped her bag near the door and sat in the chair Pearl pointed to. A cup of warm water, then a plate of cornbread, rough and dry but real. She ate like a woman who'd forgotten what hunger felt like. Pearl said nothing, just watched. That night, Rowan didn't sleep. She lay on the cot near the window, listening to the wind shift through the orchard. Every creak of wood sounded like gunfire. Every shadow was a memory. In the morning, she met the others. Maggie was in the barn, wrestling with a feed sack and cursing like a dockhand. She had red hair piled high and a mouth that rarely stopped moving. Her dress was too fine for farm work, but worn through at the seams. She raised an eyebrow when she saw Rowan. "You're the dead man's daughter," she said flatly. Rowan just nodded. Right, Maggie said, turning back to the feed. Don't touch my whiskey and we'll get along fine. Moira was different. She kept to herself, moving with a quiet grace that came from knowing too much pain. She tended the goats and the herb garden. When Rowan passed her near the well, Moira gave a small nod. Not cold. Not warm. Just recognition. The three of them didn't speak much. They worked the land like mules, side by side but never truly together. Rowan didn't mind. She was good with silence. It had been her only company since she was 12, since her mother's death carved her open. Pearl tried to fill the gaps. She made stew in the evenings and told stories of the old days, of boarding houses and bootleggers, of men who came and went and the women who stayed behind. But her face creased deeper every time she opened a letter from the bank. Rowan saw the worry in her eyes, the fear she tried to hide. She asked, one night, how long Pearl had. 3 days, Pearl said simply. Then they take it. Rowan felt something shift then, deep in her bones. The land had already taken her father. It would not take this place too. She couldn't let it, even if it wasn't hers. Later, in the barn, Maggie spoke while cleaning a saddle. There's a cattle auction coming up in Red Bluff, she said, not looking up. Big prize money. Enough to pay off a farm, if you're lucky. Rowan said nothing, but something sparked in her chest. A seed of something that might have once been hope. That night, under the stars, Rowan wrote 2 letters by the light of a stubby candle. Her hand hesitated before writing the names. Unia. Lark. Sisters she hadn't seen in over a decade. One wild. One gentle. Both lost to time. She didn't know if the letters would find them. Didn't even know if she wanted them to. But she sent them anyway. Folded the pages like prayers and gave them to a rider heading north. The next morning, Rowan stood alone by the paddock, watching the bull graze with slow, deliberate movements. She rested her hands on the fence post, rough wood biting into her palms. Behind her, Pearl worked in the garden. Moira hung laundry in the breeze. Maggie cursed again from the barn. It was not home. But it wasn't hollow either. The wind whispered through the orchard again, softer this time. Like the land hadn't given up just yet. And neither had Rowan. Rain came in quiet sheets that night, soft as breath on the barn roof. It drummed a steady rhythm above Rowan's cot, the same rhythm her heart had taken since she buried her father, a slow, determined beat that refused to falter. Lantern light flickered against the wooden walls, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across her notebook. She hunched over the page, the stub of a pencil in hand, each word a weight she had to lift alone. Unia. Lark. 2 names she hadn't spoken aloud in years, carved into her memory like initials into bark. One had run wild before she was old enough to ride. The other had been sent away when their mother died, too young to carry grief, too precious to leave behind. Rowan had stayed. She always stayed. Until staying cost her everything. The pencil moved slowly, scraping the paper with care. She didn't waste words. These letters were not for sentiment. They were for summoning. For calling what blood she had left back to her. Whether they'd answer was another matter. Unia had vanished into outlaw country last she'd heard, gun hands and poker dens and whispered names. Lark was somewhere back east, living a life built on books and soft manners, far from dust and cattle and gun smoke. But family is a cord that doesn't always break when it's pulled too tight. It frays, it bleeds, but sometimes it still holds. Rowan signed the letters with her name and nothing more. Folded them once. Twice. Tied them with twine like small, desperate offerings. When the sun rose, she handed them to a rider passing through, a man bound north with no questions in his eyes. That morning, Pearl's face was drawn tighter than usual. She held a letter in one hand, creased and damp. She said nothing about it, but Rowan could see the lines on her brow, carved deeper than time had earned. The bank was pressing harder. No grace left. 3 days, and the land would pass to men who had never worked it. In the field, Maggie hurled a rusted bucket across the grass and shouted something cruel at the sky. Her boots were caked with mud, her dress streaked with stains. She moved like someone who'd run from too much and still carried the weight of it. "Damn goats," she muttered when Rowan passed. "They don't listen to reason." "They're goats," Rowan said simply. Maggie smirked, a twitch of something unguarded beneath her sarcasm. "You're a real conversationalist, Hart." Rowan didn't smile, but her lips softened, just a little. Moira was in the herb garden, as she always was when the world frayed at the seams. She moved with silent purpose, her hands careful and knowing, as if the plants had secrets only she could coax free. Rowan watched her for a moment, noting how her fingers brushed rosemary like it might remember kindness. She wanted to ask Moira how she stayed so steady, but the question never made it to her mouth. After supper, they gathered in the parlor, the fire small but steady. Pearl sat near the hearth, thumbing an old photograph of her late husband. Maggie stretched out on the floor, a bottle beside her, humming a song no one else knew. Moira mended a shirt with even stitches, her eyes never lifting from the fabric. Rowan sat near the window, watching the storm roll in again, darker this time, heavier. It was then Maggie spoke, her voice slicing the silence like a knife through ripe fruit. "There's a cattle auction coming up in Red Bluff," she said, not looking at anyone. "Big money. Big risk. The kind of event where people win or end up buried behind a saloon." Rowan turned her head. "When?" "5 days," Maggie said, taking a long drink. "They're offering prize money for a pure-breed bull and clean paperwork. Winner takes enough to buy half the valley. That's what I heard, anyway." Moira looked up then. Her eyes were calm, but sharp. "Sounds like a fool's errand," she said. "That trail is bad country." "So's losing a farm," Rowan answered. Pearl didn't speak, but her silence said more than words might have. Later that night, Rowan stood in the barn with the bull, the same stubborn, smoke-scarred creature that had followed her from Hollow Creek like a shadow with hooves. He stared at her with a slow blink, chewing thoughtfully. She rested her forehead against his, eyes closed. "Looks like you're going to Red Bluff, old man," she whispered. "Try not to kill anyone on the way." In the days that followed, preparations settled into their bones. Saddles were checked, maps unfolded, cans packed. Rowan moved like a woman who had stopped waiting for life to offer peace and started carving her own out of stone. Maggie tested pistols at dawn, the shots cracking through the fog like thunder. Moira gathered salves and tinctures in a canvas pouch, her face unreadable. Pearl stitched a patch onto Rowan's coat. Didn't say anything about it. Just handed it over one morning with a nod. Rowan tucked it close like it was a blessing. 2 days before they were set to ride, Rowan found herself on the porch with Moira, watching clouds scatter low across the hills. "You've done this before," Rowan said quietly. Moira didn't deny it. "What did it cost you?" Moira's hands twisted in her lap. "Everything," she said. Then softer, "But it gave me back something too." Rowan looked at her then, not as a stranger, but as someone who'd walked the same broken road. "I don't know if I'm doing this for Pearl," she admitted. "Or for Pa. Or just because I need to hurt someone who deserves it." Moira turned, her gaze level. "As long as you know the difference, it matters less why you ride," she said. "Only how far you're willing to go once you start." In the distance, lightning split the horizon. Neither of them flinched. The morning of their departure came with cold air and a sky the color of slate. The bull was loaded, the supplies tied down. Maggie emerged with her hair braided and a long coat flapping like a crow's wings. Moira checked the straps one final time, her hands steady as ever. Rowan mounted without fanfare. She didn't need a speech. The road would write its own. Pearl stood by the gate, a hand on the post. "You sure about this?" Rowan looked at her. "No." Pearl's smile was small, but it warmed the morning. "That's the right answer." As they turned their backs to the farm, Rowan cast one glance behind. Not for goodbye. Just a marker. A place to come back to. The trail curved out of Briar Hollow like a vein through the earth, rough and rutted. The wind picked up. The sky threatened. But the three women rode steady, flanked by silence and resolve. And behind them, Far from the ridge, 2 letters moved through hands and towns and time. One found its way to a woman named Unia, sitting in a saloon with dust on her boots and a deck of cards half played. She opened the letter slowly, read the name, and didn't speak for a long while. The other reached a schoolhouse near the edge of a quiet town, where a woman named Lark sat among ledgers and worn books. She held the letter to her chest, her eyes closed like the words hurt more than any wound. Neither woman wept. But both began to pack. The sky had changed by the 3rd day of the ride. Blue no longer, but a shade nearer silver, as if the clouds had thinned to gauze and the sun had grown weary of watching. The land stretched ahead like a rough-stitched quilt of dust and thornbrush, its silence broken only by hoofbeats and the low mutterings of a bull too proud to complain and too stubborn to stop. Rowan rode ahead, the reins loose in her fingers. Maggie trailed behind, muttering curses every few minutes, though whether at the trail or at her aching bones, no one could tell. Moira rode in silence, steady and unshaken, her presence as grounding as the hills themselves. They spoke little, each lost in her own rhythm of breath and memory. Red Bluff lay another day's ride away, but it was not the town that occupied Rowan's mind. It was the letters. The gamble. The chance that 2 shadows from her past might emerge from dust and time, tethered not by love, but by something older, blood, and the ache of unfinished stories. She didn't speak of it, couldn't bring herself to. But her eyes lingered on every ridge, every speck of motion across the plains, as if searching for answers written into the land itself. They stopped at a crossroads where a rusted sign leaned eastward, more rust than wood now, pointing toward nowhere in particular. Rowan dismounted, stretched her legs, and scanned the horizon. The wind stirred, lifting her hair in slow curls, and then, faint as memory, hoofbeats. Not theirs. She turned slowly. A figure approached from the south, framed by the shimmer of heat off stone. A horse first, lean and mean. Then the rider, a woman dressed in weather-worn leathers, dark braid trailing down her back, rifle slung careless across one shoulder like a dare. As she drew nearer, the shape of her came into focus, and Rowan felt the breath still in her chest. Unia. She hadn't changed much, still walked like she didn't owe the ground a damn thing, still carried that smirk that danced the line between charm and warning. She pulled her horse to a slow stop, gave the group a long, unreadable look, then dismounted with the ease of someone who hadn't forgotten how to fight. "Nice bull," she said, tipping her head toward the beast with a crooked grin. Maggie stared, her mouth half open. "And who the hell is this?" Rowan stepped forward, slow and cautious. "My sister." Unia chuckled, low and soft. "That's one word for it." Moira didn't blink. She only offered a nod, respectful and reserved. "Got your letter," Unia said. "Wasn't planning on answering. Then I thought about Pa, figured I owed him that much." She walked past Rowan without another word and began unsaddling her horse. Her movements were methodical, practiced, like someone who had slept under more stars than roofs. No one spoke for a long while. That evening, campfire smoke coiled into the twilight like quiet stories rising to heaven. Unia sat with one knee pulled up, a knife flicking through an apple with the casual menace of someone who could do worse if needed. Maggie kept her distance, eyes sharp. Moira stirred stew, unmoved by the shift in group dynamics. "She always like this?" Unia asked, gesturing toward Maggie with her apple. "Only when she's breathing," Rowan replied, deadpan. Maggie barked a laugh. "You should have stayed wherever you were. We've got enough fire without gasoline." Unia shrugged. "Wasn't planning to stay long. Just figured you might need a little backup if things go sideways." "We're not looking for blood," Moira said gently. Unia's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. "Then you're not looking hard enough." Later, Rowan sat beside her, passing a canteen between them in silence. The stars burned brighter here, unfiltered and wild. For a long time, they said nothing. "Heard Silas Blackthorne has a place up north," Unia murmured. "Big operation. Cattle, forgery, hired guns. Man like him doesn't grow unless the law looks the other way." "He killed Pa," Rowan said. "Shot him down for refusing to sell." Unia nodded slowly. "I believe it. Bastard stole half my old cruise claims 5 years back. Men disappeared. One of them was mine. They didn't say more. No comfort passed between them. But a thread began to stitch, unseen and quiet. By morning, the weather had turned. Clouds low and dark, dragging wind across the open plain. They rode in staggered silence, the bull snorting, Unia cracking jokes now and then just to see who would react. Maggie ignored her. Moira half smiled. Rowan just rode. It was nearly dusk when they reached the Red Oak Pass, a bottleneck trail flanked by jagged rock and old pine. Rowan pulled up short, her eyes narrowing. Another rider waited ahead, sitting side-saddle on a pale gray mare, a book open in her lap, as if she had not noticed the world moving around her. Lark. She wore a coat that didn't quite fit and glasses smudged with dust. Her hair was pinned in a loose knot. She looked up slowly, closed the book, and slid from the saddle with careful grace. She moved like someone who didn't belong out here, but had come anyway. "Rowan," she said, voice quiet but certain. Rowan dismounted without thinking, closing the distance in 3 long strides. She stopped just short, her breath catching. "I didn't think you would," Rowan whispered. "I almost didn't," Lark admitted. "But I remembered something Ma used to say, you don't abandon your blood when the wind's blowing hard." Rowan nodded once. That was all she could manage. Maggie cleared her throat. "Another one?" Unia whistled. "Well, damn. It's a family reunion. I should have brought whiskey." Introductions were brief. Lark had no flair, no bluster. But as they made camp again, her presence reshaped the circle. She carried documents, maps, notes scribbled in tidy ink. She had tracked Silas's holdings through forged deeds and false titles, could name half the banks he funneled money through. "He doesn't just steal cattle," Lark explained that night, voice low over the crackle of fire. "He rewrites the land beneath people's feet. The paper says he owns it, so the law follows." "Unless we break the paper," Rowan said. Lark nodded. "And show the truth." Unia spat into the dust. "Truth don't win gunfights." "It wins juries," Lark replied. "Ever seen a jury that wasn't bought?" Unia shot back. Rowan stood, hands at her sides. "We don't need them all to believe. Just enough." The sisters looked at one another across years of silence, across pain that still shaped their spines and softened their voices. There was no clean forgiveness here. But there was something else. Shared purpose, perhaps. A reason to ride forward. By the next morning, the 5 women rode as one. They reached the low hills by midday. Lucky Kincaid waited at the base of a stone ridge, a flask in one hand, a revolver in the other. He hadn't shaved, hadn't bathed, but his eyes were clear. "You're late," he said. "We're right on time," Rowan answered. He led them through the hills to a place that didn't appear on any map, a canyon filled with stolen cattle and armed guards, ledgers hidden beneath false floors, brands burned in secret. It was Silas's empire, rotten at the core. They gathered what they needed: documents, tools, names. Moira stitched a gash in Rowan's palm after a fall. Unia kept watch. Maggie sweet-talked a sleepy guard into sharing the layout. Lark read the ledgers aloud, voice calm, eyes unblinking. As the sun fell, they mounted again. "What now?" Unia asked. "Now we go to Red Bluff," Rowan said. "And we finish it." They rode into the twilight, shadows stretched long, hearts heavy with what had been found and what would come. Rowan didn't look back. This time, they all followed. The road back from the hills carried more than saddlebags and stolen ledgers. It carried weight, of memory, of choice, of the sharp edge between justice and vengeance. The women rode in near silence, each wrapped in her own thoughts as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the trail. Rowan led, her eyes fixed forward, but her mind caught somewhere between the scorched ground of Hollow Creek and the courthouse steps waiting in Red Bluff. The documents were safe, tucked beneath layers of oilskin in Lark's pack, and yet it wasn't the proof she feared losing. It was the conviction to do what had to be done once they arrived. Her father's voice lived in her now, not in words but in feeling, an ache under her ribs that tightened each time the horizon shifted. Behind her, Unia rode with one hand resting on her saddle horn and the other near the butt of her revolver. She didn't speak, didn't joke like she had earlier. The closer they got to town, the more she grew quiet, like the wind had left her mouth to fill her fists instead. Something dangerous stirred in her. Rowan could feel it in the air between them, a storm waiting for its reason to break. Lark sat upright in her saddle, back straight, hands gloved, the documents clutched as if they were holy texts. She'd been up late the night before, studying them again, reading aloud the list of ranches seized, dates altered, names forged. Her voice had not shaken. But now, her face was pale, her lips drawn thin. This wasn't the classroom. These weren't ideas. This was real, and the world didn't always bend for justice. She knew that now. Moira's horse moved steady at Rowan's side. She carried no gun, but there was something steel-forged in her posture. In the quiet way she scanned the trail's edges and watched the sky. A different kind of readiness. One born of losing things she'd loved and surviving the silence that came after. Maggie trailed last, muttering to herself and kicking at her horse's ribs when it slowed too much. She was still nursing a bruise on her thigh from the scuffle near Silas's hideout, and though she hadn't complained, she moved with a wince that said more than words. Still, there was fire in her. When they'd left the canyon, she'd lit a match and tossed it into one of Silas's bunkhouses, not looking back when the flames rose. "I want him to see it burning," she'd said, "before he falls." The first night, they camped under a thicket of cottonwoods, the fire small, voices smaller. Unia paced while the others rested. Moira brewed tea from the crushed herbs she carried, the scent drifting like comfort through the night. Rowan sat apart, sharpening her knife in long, steady strokes. The tension had sunk into her shoulders, into the hard set of her jaw. "You're not sleeping," Moira said, sitting beside her. "Didn't figure I would." Moira watched her for a while. "You're different now." Rowan stopped, looked up. "When you first came to Briar Hollow," Moira said, "you were hollowed out. Grief wore your skin like a dress 2 sizes too big. Now—" Rowan waited. "Now you're carrying something else. Anger, maybe. Or purpose." Rowan looked away. "I don't know if I can tell the difference." "You don't have to," Moira said. "Not yet. But before that courthouse, you will." Rowan swallowed hard. "I keep seeing Pa. On the ground." His eyes closed, like he was already dreaming of leaving. Moira didn't flinch. "And do you know what he'd want for you?" Rowan nodded. "To stay. To plant roots. To breathe without fear." Moira touched her hand, brief and warm. "Then start there." Sleep came slowly and left early. By morning, the wind had turned cold, the clouds dragging gray across the sky. They rode harder that day, the urgency a pulse they all felt, though none of them named it. Midway through the second day, they crossed paths with a patrol. 3 men, lean and mean-eyed, rifles slung loose and questions heavy in their mouths. Unia stiffened. Rowan stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Just heading west," she said, voice calm. "No trouble." One of the men eyed the bull, then the women, then the packs. "Looks like more than just a pleasure ride." Unia's hand hovered near her hip. Maggie muttered something unprintable. Lark, to everyone's surprise, stepped in. "We're registered to compete in the Red Bluff cattle auction. These are our papers." She held out a document, one of the only honest ones in their collection. The man took it, read it slowly, lips moving. Then he spit into the dust. "Better watch yourselves," he said, handing it back. "Lot of bad types out that way." "We're worse," Unia said under her breath as they passed. They didn't speak again until the men were out of sight. "You think he knew?" Rowan asked. "He knew enough to stay out of the way," Unia said. That night, the fire was quiet. Maggie didn't drink. Moira sat with her hands wrapped around a tin cup, staring into the flames like she could read futures in them. Lark took off her glasses and cleaned them in slow circles. "We might not all make it," she said quietly. When we ride into Red Bluff, we're not just exposing a fraud. We're putting ourselves in front of the kind of men who make problems disappear. Rowan nodded. I know. I mean it, Lark said, voice harder than usual. This isn't just about evidence. It's about who stands beside it, who dares to say it aloud. I will, Rowan said. So will I, Unia added. I've got nothing left to lose, Maggie said. And nothing worth living for if I turn away now. Moira didn't speak for a while. Then she lifted her gaze. He took too much from too many. I won't let him take one more. Rowan felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Not courage. Something quieter. Resolve. The final day brought them within sight of Red Bluff just after noon. The town spread out below like a stain against the golden hills, its buildings slouched and swollen with money. The courthouse stood at the center, a whitewashed lie of law and order. They camped outside town, hidden among the rocks. Tomorrow would bring their reckoning. Tonight, they settled in close, no one drifting far. The fire was just warmth now. No stories. No songs. Rowan walked a little ways from camp, stood on the ridge, and watched the wind stir the long grass below. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. Unia joined her, hands in her coat pockets. You ready? She asked. No. Good, Unia said. Means you won't do something stupid. Rowan finally looked at her. Why did you come? Unia shrugged. Pa deserved better. And maybe I needed to know if I still had a family worth coming back for. Rowan nodded. You do. Unia didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. You know, after all this, Unia said, you could stay. Build something. I might, Rowan said. Depends what's left when it's over. They stood in silence until the wind died down. Back at camp, Moira was already asleep, wrapped in her blanket like a child safe in a cradle. Maggie stared at the stars, fingers twitching like she was rehearsing lines no one had asked for. Lark sat with her notebook open, still writing, even now. Rowan lay beside the fire, staring into its belly until her eyes blurred. Tomorrow, she would walk into the courthouse with truth on her tongue and a storm at her back. Tomorrow, she would become the woman her father believed she could be. And tonight, she would rest beside her sisters, those born of blood and those found in fire. Morning arrived with the color of steel, cold light brushing across the red hills like a blade. The air was still, too still, as if the earth itself knew something was coming and held its breath in quiet reverence. Rowan Hart stood at the edge of camp, watching Red Bluff slowly stir below. Smoke from cook fires twisted up through chimney stacks, soft against the pale sky, as men in suits began to fill the courthouse square. From this distance, they looked like ants circling sugar, but Rowan knew better. They were wolves in pressed coats, all smiles and sharpened teeth. Behind her, the others stirred. Moira folded her blanket with careful hands, her expression unreadable but calm. Maggie dressed in silence, wiping dust from her boots as if she meant to face death clean. Lark tucked her glasses behind her ears, papers secured beneath her coat, lips set in a line of quiet resolve. And Unia loaded her revolver without flourish, each bullet sliding home with a click that sounded like judgment. They didn't speak until the last saddle was tightened and the bull was coaxed to his feet, ropes slack and gentle. Rowan approached the animal with slow steps, resting her hand against his neck. You ready? She whispered. The bull snorted softly, as if to say he'd always been. They rode toward town like a storm rolling in, slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Red Bluff noticed. By the time they reached the edge of Main Street, heads turned. Murmurs spread like brush fire. 5 women, dust-worn and steady-eyed, with a massive bull in tow and the kind of energy that made men shift uncomfortably in their boots. Sheriff Alden Tate met them first. He stepped off the boardwalk outside his office, one hand resting on his belt, the other raising his hat in a gesture caught between welcome and warning. Rowan, he said carefully, I don't know what this is, but I know the look of it. And it don't smell like peace. She dismounted without a word, reached into her coat, and handed him a folded ledger. He opened it. Reed went pale. "These are Silas Blackthorne's records," Rowan said. "Stolen deeds. Stolen cattle. Evidence of arson. Murder." Tate looked up, his throat moving like he'd swallowed a stone. "He's at the courthouse," Rowan continued, "calling himself Mr. Crane. Bidding on Briar Hollow in the next hour." Tate hesitated, torn between duty and fear. "You knew," Lark said from behind her. "You just didn't have the proof. Now you do." The sheriff held the ledger a little tighter. Then he nodded once. "I'll walk in with you." They moved together down the street, the crowd parting as if the air had thickened. Townsfolk stepped back, unsure whether to watch or run. The courthouse loomed ahead, whitewashed and grand, meant to impress. Today it looked like a mausoleum waiting for the right name to carve into stone. Inside, the auction had already begun. The room smelled of ink and dust and power, packed with landowners and bankers and men who wore their wealth like armor. At the front, Judge Hollis sat behind the podium, spectacles low on his nose, gavel in hand. And beside him stood Silas Blackthorne. He was dressed like respectability, navy blue coat, gold pocket watch, silver-tipped boots. But Rowan saw the truth behind the polish. The smirk that never reached his eyes. The cut of a man who had taken everything and slept soundly through the screams. He was speaking when they entered, voice smooth as bourbon, gesturing toward a map of Briar Hollow pinned behind him. "And with this final acquisition," Silas said, "we will at last bring proper industry to the valley. Prosperity for all." Rowan stepped forward. "Liar." The room froze. Silas turned slowly. His smile faltered for just a heartbeat before it returned, tighter now. "Miss Hart, what an unexpected entrance." Sheriff Tate moved up beside her, holding the ledger high. "We have evidence, Judge. Fraudulent deeds. Stolen cattle. Names of every man he paid to torch a ranch." Lark stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "He killed our father. He destroyed Hollow Creek. And he'll do the same to Briar Hollow if you let him." Judge Hollis adjusted his glasses, frowning. "These are serious accusations." "They're true," Rowan said. Unia unrolled a second ledger. He branded stolen cattle with ghost marks. Hid them in a canyon north of the pass. "We've seen it." The crowd began to murmur. Men shifted. A few left their seats. Maggie stepped forward, speaking for the first time. "I watched him take everything from a woman I knew. Burned her out and bought the ashes. Called it progress." Silas's smile cracked then, just a hair. He stepped down from the podium, slow and measured. "You come in here with your stories and your tears," he said. "But this is business. Progress costs. And some folks just can't keep up." "You killed my father," Rowan said. "I improved your land value." Moira stepped forward. "You think no one will stop you because you've wrapped yourself in law. But you forgot something." Silas turned. Moira didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You forgot that truth still burns." Silas reached for his coat. Everything slowed. He moved fast, faster than Rowan expected. His hand dove for the pistol beneath his jacket, eyes wide and desperate now, lips pulling back from his teeth. And then, Moira fired. The sound shattered the stillness like glass. Silas jerked, stumbled, fell sideways with a grunt that barely sounded human. Blood bloomed across his coat like a slow red flower. His gun clattered to the floor. Judge Hollis stood stunned. Sheriff Tate moved forward, barking for men to secure the room. And the crowd, silent at first, broke into waves of voices, accusations, disbelief, a surge of noise that cracked the spell entirely. Rowan didn't move. She stood rooted, staring at the man who had taken her father, her land, her past, and now lay bleeding at her feet. Unia stepped to her side. "It's done." Rowan shook her head. "No. It's just begun." Silas didn't die that day. They took him, broken and bleeding, to the jailhouse. The evidence held. The judge opened an investigation. And for the first time in years, The law bent back toward the people who had been crushed beneath its weight. The days that followed moved slow, like honey on a winter morning. Pearl's deed was returned. The bank backed off, shamed into silence. Her farm stood. Not untouched, but unbroken. The bull won second place at the Red Bluff Fair. A blue ribbon hung from his pen like a war medal. Maggie wept when she saw it, though she claimed it was dust in her eye. She bought the old saloon and turned it into a theater. The first performance was a one-woman show she wrote herself. Half the town came. Moira delivered 2 babies that spring. Both mothers survived. She never said much about it. Just lit a candle in the church and walked home barefoot through the grass. Lark opened a school in Briar Hollow. She taught numbers and letters and how to recognize a false name on a land deed. The children adored her. Unia didn't stay. She never would. But she rode out with a promise on her lips that she'd return when the wind settled. She left a coin on Rowan's windowsill. A habit from their childhood. A message only they understood. And Rowan, she stayed. She tended the land with Pearl. Rebuilt the barn. Took the saddle down less often. Let her feet find peace in dirt instead of dust. At night, she sat on the porch with the dog-eared pages of her father's ledger, reading names aloud like prayers. One evening, as the sun slipped low and the sky bruised purple, she stood alone in the orchard where her mother's trees still grew. The wind moved through the branches, soft as breath. She closed her eyes, listened. "I did it," she whispered. "We did." She felt no answer, only peace. And that was enough. Under the wide and unrelenting sky, something new had taken root. Not gold, not fences, but story, but memory, but love, the kind not spoken loudly, but shown in the quiet moments, in the hands that held and the hearts that healed. The land broke, and the women mended it. Together.